we didn't eat tomatoes year round. We didn't eat certain foods in a season that they weren't expected to be there. And now we've sort of gotten out of that rhythm of what is natural and what nature provides is really what sustained us pre-industrial age.
Welcome back to Illuminating Being, the podcast where Dr. Summers and I have really been exploring, what it means to live a whole, aligned, and really, embracing life from the inside out, right? So for you new listeners, I'm your host, Dr. Elizabeth Cook, and I'm really glad that you're here. If you haven't checked out our episodes, our last dozen or so episodes, we really opened the door about creating small but big shifts in how we nourish our bodies, really how we can connect with our children from the very newborn stage all the way up into adulthood, and really just the idea of how we move around the world, tuning into our intuition, our senses, and the power of, plant-rich eating, really with your insight, Dr. Summers, your pediatric insight, and just this awareness of, how we reconnect with our senses to nourish ourselves in every day. So for the next set of episodes, we're thinking about the idea that you and I are sitting here in, it was first really rainy Pittsburgh, but now it's this quenching hot
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, but we step into the summer. And so I thought we'd start our conversation about this idea of, tuning into the rhythms of seasonality, and really how grounding and understanding where we are in the seasons kind of taps us into like how we nourish our bodies.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just going to throw the first question to you. So when we start with the idea of this rhythm, like what do we mean, right? And often connecting that to the seasonality. What do you think about when we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that we've spoken about too is just think about my growing up that the seasons and what food was available. We didn't eat tomatoes year round. We didn't eat certain foods, in a season that they weren't expected to be there. So in the middle of winter, you might have had tomato sauce because whatever was canned and prepared, but a tomato in the middle of the winter was usually pretty pathetic, right? It didn't have much flavor. And now we've sort of gotten out of that rhythm of like what is natural and what nature provides is really, what sustained us pre-industrial age, right? So I think that's really the turning point for so many things. And so the question always is, how do we adapt and take hold of some of the advances in technology without losing sight that not everything old is bad, right? We continually have this sort of sense that new is better, right? And I think our elders always help us to sort of reframe and remind us that, there is something to what they did or how, what we will become the elders at some point. So what our wisdom will hold. But rhythms, that is sort of natural. We look at rivers, we call the circadian rhythm. Our bodies are set to a certain standard, a certain rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, and we all vary that. And, part of it's dependent on our lifestyles and our work and those sort of things. But so it's like the matching of our internal, and we are a reflection of nature in the biggest sense. So a lot of what we are doing is sort of related to where we live. And so if you're in the northern climes, the days and nights vary. I mean, right now we just, passed the summer solstice, so we have the longest amount of daytime, right? So it doesn't get dark till 9:30 or 10, right? So
Feel
like,
that.
yeah, so it's like, oh, I should go to bed, and then it's like already 10 o'clock, and you're like, oh my gosh, didn't realize it went by so fast. And in the middle of the winter, we're like 5 o'clock, you're getting home, you're leaving work, it's dark, you're going to work, it's dark. So, it definitely affects our mood and all of those sort of things. And
Yeah, it hits differently, definitely.
right, right,
The light, right? So
right,
the smells of summer. I mean, I
right.
love that first awareness when you're like, oh, there it is. Um, And I guess the tomatoes is a good one because my husband is adamant that he does not like tomatoes, and I guess I never really connected. I mean, maybe you've even said it, but I never. But it's truly true. Like they are not that great when they're not in season. Um, so which just thinking of senses, I guess how have you come? Well, I guess you kind of explained that. Really, like this disconnectedness. So taking back as here's summer, here's arrival. What are things that we can do? Something that pops up maybe occasionally in our lives around summers that really allow us to become a student of those seasons.
Right. I mean, I think now the farmers markets have certainly blossomed, right? I mean, we would maybe go to a farm when we were growing up if you lived outside of the city. If you think about it, most of our cities were farms before they became these great urban centers. And if we think about pre-industrial age, um, agrarian part of our economy was the number one thing, whether it was growing food or whether it was growing cotton to make and manufacture textiles. Um, but this sort of metamorphosis or transformation of our country and our whole world, right? So if we look at what's been happening, and just thinking about T. Colin Campbell and the book Whole and a lot of his early work, when we look at the whole food plant-based, he did this China study. And if we look at that as in the 70s and 80s, China was it was industrializing, but majority of people lived in the rural areas. They've had the same transformation as we've had where people are leaving with industrial manufacturing or just farming where you don't need this people to do the farming. You have machines doing it, right? So we may still be getting the benefits of, the soil with growing things, but then you don't have the people who are picking it and doing the work. And so we need to create new industries, or people look to sort of sustain themselves. So I think in the rhythm and the seasonality, the thing about summer is that it's the time of plenty, right? So I think looking at what happens in the different seasons, and I came across this thing, this circannual variation, and just looking at what happens in our food understanding, which really sort of hit home to me, which um, I thought this was an interesting sort of piece.
Okay,
So basically, the
describe it
winter,
for our listeners.
yeah. So the circannual cycle is that the winter is high in protein and fat. The spring is high in protein and fiber. The summer is high in carbohydrates, and the autumn is fats and carbs. And so, what has happened in our industrialization is that the processing of food is basically made fats and carbs year round. And so when we think about that, it sort of translates into why we've had this sort of obesity epidemic and just weight gain that's happened across all of society, right? So I think, and we're also sort of like trying to, I think in this sort of podcast, sort of move back. I don't like to sort of stigmatize or provide any shame or blame, because I think the overarching premise here is that, we are all succumbing to sort of the advertising and the world we live in. So it's not just willpower, right? I mean, we can certainly have that, but it's really hard when the foods that you're being presented and offered are coming from the industrial complex here. And
Right.
so how do we reset that, redefine it, and help people sort of navigate, you know, getting back to sort of the more natural rhythm of how we should eat. And so that gets back to cooking and all sorts of things. And I think this, part of it, I want to say it's elitism, but it becomes more challenging. I think sometimes, and I look at it, sometimes the people who are poorer eat better because they use what's available um, to make it simple ingredients, and they can still get good nutrients as long as they have access to just food, right? Or produce or things. And then once we become successful, we sort of move away. We go more towards processed foods and more high animal protein base, and my sense of doing, pediatrics for the last 40 years is that I've witnessed, firsthand the transformation of, health to being, more challenged by health impacts of what our diets have done. And it's the one area which we continue to try to address, but there's no simple solution, right, for
Yeah,
that.
and I feel,
Um,
just listening to you, one, I'm really tuned into the idea of cycles, right? And so, like, being a female, there's this enormous amount of research and literature and content being shared around our, the female cycle and the 28 days. But now, tapping in, I really am going to like geek out on it. The idea of that cycle that you just spoke of with that little visual of the food groups that become more of an abundance based on our seasonal rhythms, because that makes a lot of sense. So it almost gives you another, not that we need more of it, but like having these cues or these like awareness of what was really allows you to tap into that intentionality of what we choose today. And so then that would become really, I would say, my next thought process, thinking I'm a listener, is like, well, how do I even learn about this? And so one key way to do that is when you're going to the farmer's market, really another thing we're big about is developing community, is like talking with the farmers and those that are, spending their days packaging it and bringing it to your local community, just to kind of have a better understanding of it. And another thing, and I actually chose, it's called Harvey, but it's local to us,
right,
but I definitely dove into it. I mean, I think a lot of communities are trying to develop this whole farm to table
right,
smaller, right? Which is another idea. We want really big, too big to fail. Like, how do we come back to these smaller communities? But within the website, you can choose your groceries week
right,
to week. So you have to be very intentional of making sure you're looking at your delivery list.
right,
But in there, they'll have a seasonal series. So you can like go and see how they're changing. And just
right,
from an information gaining perspective, I've just been learning. And then you're also getting that localized food grown, and it's accessible to, a pretty large network outside the farms themselves.
right.
And it is reasonably priced. I mean, I wouldn't say, it's not, it doesn't feel, well, I've actually compared to quite a few. Like, if you pick what you're going to eat and then you eat it, it's definitely, affordable. But it also brings that farm to the table, and then allows you really to experiment too. There's a lot of things that I got that I probably would
Right.
never have bought in the grocery store, but since it arrived at my door, I had the opportunity to
Well,
choose it.
right, and there are so many more things, I think, to that point that really illustrates the bounty of produce that, we are very much, there's a tomato, there's a cucumber, there's a few herbs, there's cilantro, there's parsley. Well, there's a whole slew of things that we may not even know or recognize, or, we don't have experience with, maybe the grandmothers and people that, you know, have cooked. And I think that was one of the things that Joshua McFadden writes. It says going to farm markets, and I think we've sort of tried to promote this too, is ask questions, right? So if you go to the farmer's market, don't just buy something, but engage that farmer or the person there. And what do how would you prepare this, or how would you cook this? And I think one of the other things he identifies and illuminates is that things that are seasonal tend to be cooked well together. So when things are in the season, they tend to go together, right? So trying to figure out how to match something, part of it's in front of us, right? We just may not have experience with it yet. So, asking, and, the best, I mean, it's like he talks about recipes, and I think none of us are quite there, but, at the ultimate, it's like the grandmother sort of thing where you don't have a measuring cup, you don't have a spoon, you just know how much to put in. Right. And so I think that's something that most of us are just not comfortable. Like, I need to have a specific recipe. We use this app called Paprika. So you find great recipes, you can put them on that Paprika app and then resource it. So I think, those are always good ways to start, is sort of some guidance. But I think the more we cook, the more we become comfortable with like the amounts of things. And obviously if you're cooking for just two, that's our biggest challenge, is that there's just two of us at home now if the kid's gone. So, having some leftovers, how much leftovers do you want? We're used to cooking and having extra. Well, I don't mind eating it for several days. My wife doesn't like to eat leftovers that many times necessarily. So not a good or bad thing. It's just, we each have that sort of preference. And then it's just time, right? So I think one of the things is trying not to get overwhelmed with how do I put it all together. And so I think part of this, hopefully, maybe we'll have some cooking demonstrations or how some simple, easy things to do. And I think getting feedback from our listeners onto what things they've done and how they've sort of, surmounted this sort of the odds of like preparing foods. And I think getting back to our senses, all these foods taste different. So we get a carrot, we get a tomato. It may be sweet to me, it might not be sweet to you. I think those variations are really personal. We have if we see chocolate cake, we think it's going to be sweet, but there's a dark chocolate, there's a milk chocolate. So there's different ways that those things can be presented. And so I think no assumptions is, I think, and I think as a pediatrician trying to get the kids to engage in this, one of the things that this Joshua McFadden offers is that, taste all these fruits and vegetables raw, right? Let your palate, all your senses sort of experience the variability and is it the sweet? Is it the salty? I mean, all these sorts of things that are there in the native fruit or vegetable, right?
Yeah.
And that will maybe help to decide what you may want to spice things up with. I mean, Scott, and he really tries to make this, I think, a lesson and how to approach things and not making it. There are lots of great cookbooks out there, but I mean, if it takes you 2 hours to do a recipe, I mean, who has
We
time
must,
to do it?
yeah, that's like a hobby and,
Right.
passion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this also leans towards, a big thing that about myself is, taking the moments in the morning to set my intentions for the day. And then at the evening, creating just a moment to reflect, on what I did, in one space or another. I'm great at compartmentalizing my life. But so just like thinking through, so in summer, we're surrounded by really, I guess, I think, abundance, right? Like everything is blooming and being grown, and like there's the bright tomato finally appears.
Right.
Berries, I believe, right?
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Strawberries. This is this. I
Learning.
mean, June is the strawberry moon,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
That's when the strawberries,
Um,
you know.
Cucumbers and zucchinis start. Your neighbors start sharing if they're creating their, backyard gardens. But so, and those foods are hydrating, right? They're plentiful water. They're cooling.
Right?
Um, they're raw, so you can quickly eat them, right? It spends more time, and you kind of want to eat your berries outside. So there's this whole sensory of, and then like I'm thinking about, I don't know, you really got me with these seasons. Like fall is like where there's something about the harvest, right? You got your apples and your carrots and like, like squash, right? For some reason, everyone starts sharing their squashes.
Yeah.
I'm not a gardener, so now I'm coming to realize, like, if I just tuned in a little bit. But these are more like dense, right? Kind of richer in flavor. I don't know. I love fall. That's my favorite holiday. So really warming, and I guess we're preparing like the
Right.
stews and your chilies. Like there's a warmth to it. And then winter. Oh, it's winter. I guess root vegetable.
Root
Like they grow.
vegetables. Well, if
Yeah.
you look at, harvest times, and if you look at religions, I mean, most of our big holidays do, they focus on foods. If you look at Easter,
Right.
you look at, not that
Duh.
Halloween's a big one, but, Thanksgiving, Christmas, these are, moments where there's some abundance and there's some collection of foods and some celebration of what's available, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he does.
And so it's like permission to do these things almost.
Right. Right. I think if we look at the, Native Americans or the indigenous peoples, they really understood nature and they really took advantage. One of their sort of preeminent sort of mantras is to take only what you need, right? We take more than we need and we waste a lot, right? So part of our sort of underlying theme, I think, is to sort of, eat better, waste less. And how can we sort of move in that direction? And how much is enough, right? So I think we have this supersize mentality in this country, which is certainly sort of shifted to the world in some respects. Because if you go around the world, you go to France, you go to different places, the plates are not as robustly filled as we have in America, right? And I think those societies reflect, they still have health issues, but I think they tend to celebrate food in similar ways, but I think they honor some of those things of what we're talking about when it comes to the seasonality and rhythm of times of year and what's available. Using, herbs and spices. I try to get my, new parents or just parents in general, introducing more herbs, spices, and flavors to
Early
newborns
on.
early
Right.
on,
Yeah.
because that flavor palette, who knows? And I think part of it is if the parents haven't done that, it is a little bit harder to sort of envision how to do that. And so I haven't figured that out yet, but I think, I think it's one of the things we can bring on some people who are, experiencing this and introducing those sort of foods to their families and kids. And that, I mean, success isn't measured necessarily by them finishing their plate. I think that's sort of like I was in the Clean Plate Club. So that sort of moniker is really
Sure.
detrimental to how we view food, right? So I think
Yeah.
when, I mean, to this day, it's sort of hard to not clean my
But we
plate.
talked about, the Clean the Plate Club came from a generation of those that had less and none. So, that's just another drop of wisdom is like where were we, right? Where are we? Where are we going, but where we ought to go. So like we're at that, realization of there's all of this wisdom. And just connecting that dot, like that clear the plate was built off of a generation of folk that did not have enough at the time. So I'm thinking about our next set of episodes because we introduced the seasons, and I think, we have the summer that we're in, and then we talked about the fall and the winter, and then spring is really about kind of springing out of that heaviness, I was also, globally, I think where we live, it's very seasonal,
Right.
but there's still that essence of what is available in those geographical spaces based on,
Right.
the cycle of the rotating mass that we all live on.
Right.
So just
Right.
tuning into that reality, I think would be really powerful. And so, is there 4 seasons, or I think, is there an opportunity that or a book that maybe we want to dive into
Yeah.
to kind
So
of each
this
episode
book,
could be
yeah.
about each season.
So basically, I have this book, The Six Seasons, and it's a
6
new way
seasons,
with
6
vegetables.
senses.
Right. So
6 seasons.
senses, Joshua McFadden, and he basically there's a famous chef Dan Barber, who's at Blue Hill Stone Barns, which is up in the Hudson Valley in New York. And he worked there, and then he moved out to Portland, Oregon, working on a farm. And so he's basically created the six seasons basically looks at winter, spring, summer, fall, but divides summer into sort of early, middle, and late. And so I think because the summer season is so robust, as we sort of mentioned, with what produce and foods are grown, and there's some variability in that. And I think, a lot of this is sort of, we're talking about this circadian or the rhythm of eating. Um, we're now trying to, and I think hopefully we can address more of these issues as far as stepping it back and maybe not just being influenced by the media and how we should be eating, but looking at getting back to our real, nature
Roots.
story,
Mm.
our roots. Perfect segue. And I think also this is, you know, as a pediatrician, I mean, my mom was the cook, my grandmother, I mean, not that men don't cook, and I think there's more men involved in the kitchen these days, but I think it's been on the shoulders of mothers and they're just forever, right? Because there's a management piece to it. There's also mothers, give birth. And so there's just certain parts of sort of humanity that, rightfully or wrongfully, just have been,
It's
carried
where
on.
our biological minds like sit. Like you
Right.
produce, you create and develop a baby. Like there's this intuitive nature to want to nourish and feed it and continue to grow. So like it is a reality, right? It becomes very instinctual. Well,
Nature
I
and
think
nurture.
yeah,
So,
yeah, it's there. So I love these conversations because I don't, it's not just about food, but I think we're bringing it, full circle. It's really about how we live, right? And
yes.
nature is constantly offering us an invitation to slow down. And so that's another part is like really to lean into the tastes and really how we nourish ourselves. It's not just, I'm hungry, I need to eat. Like there's a whole space that you can really create intentionality around nourishing our bodies and creating that community and family. So I look forward to diving each of those seasons in our next few
Yes,
episodes.
for
And
sure. For sure.
so I'm just going to do a call to action. So for our listeners, if there's something that resonated with you, we'd love to for you to share it with a friend, or even leave a comment, or if
Yes.
you're listening, you probably know us at this point. Give us ideas of like what would be better, and also visit your local farmers market this week. And I would love to hear any first time journeys.
Yeah. And I'll just throw out the early summer vegetables or beets, the early carrots, celery, fennel, new potatoes, and turnips are some of the ones that may or may not be on everybody's sort of panel of like foods. I think probably celery, carrots, potatoes, but I think there's some interesting recipes
Yeah,
out
those are
there.
some new ones.
One that I found in this book is a celery apple peanut salad. And I think in this hot summer
Sounds
days, you want to look for things that you don't have to cook, right? So the heat is outside right now, very intense. So you don't want to heat up the kitchen to be
right.
sweating. You want to
I would
have
love that
something.
recipe. So maybe
Yeah,
we should share it
I
with
will
our
share it.
listeners.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Awesome.
until next time, stay curious, eat seasonally,
Yes.
and let the rhythm lead the way. No.
Beautifully
um,
said, Liz.
thanks for
Okay.
showing up.
All right. Awesome. See ya.